Hey, friendo, Steve here. Welcome back to Wrestle Juice. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that is sort of, divisive and polarizing and dividing the internet wrestling community. Bringing out a lot of people saying, oh, a lot of finger wagging and pearl clutching happening. And of course, I'm talking about the Hangman Adam Page versus Swerve Strickland match that went down on at AEW Full Gear. For some reason, the last couple days, the rhetoric behind, that match and if it went too far is really kicked up several notches due to several prominent names in the world of pro wrestling talking about it in a very passionate and negative way. I'm talking about Jim Cornette and PW Insider's Dave Scherer. First up, let's talk about Jim Cornette because he is usually on the top end when it comes to pro wrestling podcasts. There's obviously a lot of Cornette fans out there. He has been famously very critical of a lot of what AEW does, from its wrestlers to the stories to the booking to the this to the that. And I'll be the first to say, I think if you cut through a lot of the Cornette bullshit, he's a guy who's got obviously a lot of experience in the business. I don't agree with a lot of what he says, but there are some points he makes that I'll often agree with. And so this is what he had to say about the Swerve Hangman spot, where there was a like blood drinking involved. Of course, it's a famous spot where Hangman gets under Swerve Strickland and he starts like lapping up the blood. And it was kind of gross, but I'll be honest with you, it was kind of awesome. He says this. He says, I believe at that point, again, I go back to when Lyndon Johnson said after Cronkite came back from Vietnam, if we've lost Cronkite, we've lost America. Jim Cornette's pretty old, so the fact that he would make a reference to Cronkite and Lyndon Johnson in Vietnam is kind of par for the course. He says, I think they've lost the female audience that they might not have had to begin with on that one. And again, they might have lost the network that they potentially might or might not have had off of that one. You effing idiot. He's no better than the plumber or the fucking bank-addicted drug robber. He got more hair, Paige. Otherwise, he is as stupid and demented and fucking distasteful. Is he talking about Hangman Adam Page there with the bloods? I don't know that last part. I'm not really sure. So Cornette's thing is, this is bad because he thinks that it might have lost the female audience. Pearl clutching female audience. Oh dear. Oh my. They're drinking blood. That's terrifying. Swoon, right? I guess that's what he's thinking. I did just the modicum of research on this. Like everything else, I just sort of like to go off what my gut tells me, but I don't know. My 8-year-old child has become a recent fan of the lore behind horror movies. She doesn't watch them. She's 8. She's freaked out by that kind of stuff, but she enjoys hearing about the stories. There's a channel, Film Theory, where they talk about that stuff and in a very family-friendly way. She's a fan of that. My wife, Lacey, she's a big fan of horror movies. My my second oldest stepkid, Summer, she's a horror fan. I know a lot of female horror fans, and I just think it's kind of funny that an old-timer like Jim Cornette would think, oh, God, don't show the women this extremely violent stuff because they're going to go screaming, running away in shock horror. But the men, it's okay for the men. The men can hack it, but the women can't. That's a fucking weird thing to say. It's honestly, the thing about losing the network. Here's the thing. AEW, they've done plenty of bloody matches. They've had on cable television, Chris Jericho versus Nick Gage, where the pizza cutter spot was used. That's on cable television. That's on the network. And that was years ago. So I don't know if this particular moment, which really is no worse than anything they've done in the past, is going to send WBD. The horror of the Collision ratings might do it, but I don't think Hangman Adam Page drinking Swerve's blood is going to do it. Now, let's move on to Dave Scherer, a guy who's been in the industry writing about wrestling and talking about wrestling for a very long time. He wrote for PWInsider.com an article called "What Tony Khan Allowed to Happen at Full Gear Was Vile and Disgusting, and It Sure as Hell Wasn't Pro Wrestling in the Year 2023." He says this: "I'd been thinking about how to actually say what needed to be said in a way where I didn't come off like Jim Cornette on steroids, and I mean that in the best possible way, and know that Jim might not have had any issues with what happened because he thinks the Blade has a place in the business in 2023, while I sure as hell do not, especially when the guy booking it is Tony Khan, who doesn't understand what makes color work." Color, of course, means blood. Jim Cornette, as has been revealed, definitely had a problem with it. He says this: "Let me say this up front. What Page and Swerve did was so horrific and disgusting that it turned off super loyal AEW fans. I was slammed with missives from the various platforms on Saturday night. The common theme, other than all of the blood was disgusting, was how could a man ingest another man's blood?" Again, referring to Hangman drinking Swerve's blood. He says the easy answer is that they work for one of the worst bookers and promoters of all time, a guy who has shown that he learned nothing about making a business successful from his ultra business legend father. All he learned was how to get his father to give him real money to bring his fantasy wrestling federation to life. We'll just stop there because, yes, from what I understand, AEW as a business is currently still not profitable. I've just read that. However, you can't look at the numbers that their pay-per-views pull in, and you can't look at what would surely be a pretty decent media rights deal for their television product that they'll probably, I would imagine, probably get signed, at some point in the next couple of months, at which point they'll probably end up being profitable and say this guy doesn't know how to run a business. Tony Khan seems like a pretty smart fella. You can quibble about his ability to run a pro wrestling business from a creative standpoint, but in terms of like in his first couple of years, he landed a TV deal for a pro wrestling company that pretty much nobody outside of WWE has been able to do. Even Impact just runs on their own station now, the station owned by their parent company, TNA. Sorry, and I like TNA. And say this guy doesn't know what he's doing from a business standpoint. I think that's disingenuous. And here's my thing about arguments. If you want to say this wasn't for me, I think this crossed a certain line, fine. But to start coming up like Cornette did with, this spot was stupid because it's going to lose them the network, even though they haven't lost the network yet. And they've done plenty of other stuff. It's going to drive away their female fan base. Even though I don't think there's a statistic in the world that would indicate that women would be running away from this. Not in 2023 anyways. Maybe back when Cornette was, I don't know, a spry young man in the 1960s or whatever, whenever he came up. So I think that this is sort of like a bunch of old people making much ado about nothing, especially since AEW has kind of done stuff on par with this before. I'm going to get to your guys' comments because I legitimately, and here's the thing, I'm not going to judge anybody for having an honest thought about this. I really won't. If it's not for you, it's not for you. This is not for everybody. And from what I noticed, because I haven't read all of them. I've read like a couple of them as they pop them on my phone. And I'm legitimately curious to know what you guys think. But I am famous over Going in Raw for pearl clutching at certain matches, certain spots and matches. I get really queasy when I see things like the botched Spanish Fly that Roderick Strong and Action Andretti had on Rampage last week because they landed on their heads. I get squeamish at stuff like Sid's leg breaking, Dante Martin's leg breaking, when it's structural things with the body that can be potentially career ending, when it's stuff that could be potentially life ending. When Big E got dropped on his head, I was horrified. I did not watch any replays of that. That's the stuff that really makes me queasy because that's stuff that really can affect somebody's life. I would assume that Hangman and Swerve, prior to the match, went through whatever testing would be necessary to ensure to the highest degree that Hangman Page drinking Swerve's blood in that moment And really, and he didn't really drink much of it. He just sort of put it in his mouth and then spat it out. I'm sure he swallowed plenty of it, but I'm sure they did what they could do to make sure that they were safe and clean doing it. I don't know what that entails. Probably lots of testing for various bloodborne diseases and bacteria and stuff like that. I don't know. I'm not there. I don't have to worry about that stuff because I'm not doing this stuff. But I loved the match. It's on my match of the year candidates list because it was so shocking without crossing a certain line. I've seen death matches that were far, far more gory than this. I thought this effectively used the blood. The idea being Swerve Strickland is a sick, sick villain, and Hangman Adam Page had to sink to his level in order to compete. And even that wasn't enough because Swerve still won the match. But Hangman did what he could. He was forced out of what he does to try to compete with Swerve. And therein was the problem for Hangman. He can't because Swerve is just that evil as a character. I loved the story. I did. I was like, oh my God, that's messed up. I loved it the same way I love horror movies. And I understand that horror movies, they use fake blood and it's all like truly, fake stuff. And this was two men putting on a performance that was a lot less fake than a horror movie would be. But I loved it. I thought it was dramatic. I thought it was awesome. I'm curious to hear what you guys think. And so I'm going to go ahead and just take a look at a lot of your comments here. Not a lot of frills, I've got the thing up here and I got me right here and I got the thing. Okay. So we're going to look at these and see what you guys have to say. Santiago says, great match that helped establish Swerve as the main guy. I do think the spots with the broken glass and blood drinking didn't bring much to the match. Much more to the match that the barbed wire already had, and it felt quite unnecessary. Shock for the sake of shock. Zach says it was a fitting match for the lengths Swerve had gone to in story. The most exciting match I've seen all year. That's sort of where I stand as well, Zach. Let's see here. Margasol says, I was squeamish watching it in the arena, but it was an amazing match. As soon as Swerve began to staple himself, I knew he was going to win. I think some parts were a bit much, but I can appreciate it as part of the story to convey. It was a blow-off for a blood feud. I loved Swerve showing us, and Hangman, how sick he was by stapling. He was like, you think this is going to do something to me? I'll do this to myself and laugh it off. I think that's just good villain work right there. JMC said, I absolutely loved it. Stephen Dunnigan said, fucking great. Hell of a match, and it wasn't just gratuitous violence still present. However, there was storytelling as well. Rob Zerver says, as a fan of deathmatch wrestling, this match didn't feel like Yamashita versus Alex Colon at the Showboat for GCW. This reminded me of personal grudge matches like HBK versus Triple H at Royal Rumble. Rob, I love you. You wrote a whole novel here. My goodness gracious. He says, that being said, I hope this match provides a gateway for more fans to appreciate deathmatch. He's so positive, this Rob. To appreciate deathmatch wrestling is, I believe, that some of the best in-ring storytellers today work that style almost exclusively. Mention some names. Culminating a blood feud should not be a requirement in order to put on a deathmatch. But when done, when it's done as well as this Swerve versus Hangman story, it's peak pro wrestling nonetheless, in my opinion. What a beautiful! I should have just read Rob's statement off the bat and called it a day, because that encapsulates exactly how I feel as well. Prime Joy Bearding says, I thought it was effing amazing. Z Cantor says it was so brutal that it should have been in the main event. Like, sure, world title MJF, but this was a blood feud, emphasis on the blood. Let's see here. Mario Brown says, as a black man myself, I don't think Swerve needed that spot for this match to be incredible. Accursed Hawk says, if we're being honest, it wasn't anything too crazy, yet it has some cool and crazy spots and all, but me personally, I've seen plenty more crazy death matches just on a lesser stage. 0165 says it was an awesome match. Just wanted Hangman to win personally. I get why they went with Swerve though. Static, this is actually a point that I made as well. Personally could have done without the cage interference. The two men were so locked onto each other. To see Cage come out there with his jeans on sort of took me a little bit out of it. It was a small quibble, but I thought it was awesome. Anyways, Gustavo says match of the year contender. Danny Rack says, I love Swerve, but I checked out after the blood drinking spot. I don't have a problem with blood in wrestling, but the drinking was too far for me. Daniel Craig says the blood tasting looked like a fetish. and was not good. And a couple people agreed with that with a thumbs up here. Let's see here. Michael Guerra says people complaining have clearly not seen a New Jack match. See, New Jack took it too far for me. New Jack took it too far and if he is to be believed, and I still don't know that a lot of those New Jack interviews weren't him playing up for the camera, but, launching a person off of a scaffold, however many feet high up in the air, legitimately stabbing a person, what he did with mass transit, that to me was too far because I feel like New Jack didn't have permission from the other people to do that stuff. Whereas Hangman and Swerve, I guarantee you these guys are too creative, and this feud has been too good for them not to have been on the same page. And that's what I like about it. It's two guys out there telling a story, trusting each other to go to with going to these lengths. Optimus Crime says it was dope, phenomenal, epic. Jason says this kind of match is my cup of blood, but I'm glad others liked it. Oh, I think he means isn't my cup of tea. Eastside says the blood drinking was good, a bit much, but the match slapped. Austin says take out the blood drinking spot. So it's interesting. I didn't even mention the blood drinking thing when I asked for your guys' thoughts on the match. I just said blanket, what are your thoughts on the match? And a lot of people are pointing towards the blood drinking stuff. Stu says people are going to me flack, but I absolutely hated it. I'm not in a death match that also wasn't right for me off the bat, and the blood spot was extremely stupid and quite dangerous. Both worked really hard. Still a massive Swerve fan, but it wasn't for me. And I appreciate that opinion, and I respect that opinion. Let's see here. This is interesting. Karula says match of the year. Before the match, I didn't even care about the storyline. Let's see here. Luis says I loved every single second. I was live and I was there live for it. Cameron says I loved it. I never want to see it again. Joe says I thought it was too much. And then let's see here. I want to get everybody in because all these people took their time on Thanksgiving Eve. Andrew says, who cares? Seriously, if you want to see cringy gore, go watch the new horror movie called Thanksgiving. This might be an Eli Roth burner. I'm not sure. And then Carlos Diaz says, story was so compelling beforehand that going for mere shock value to appeal to tribal fans with blood gushing everywhere was unnecessary. That's an interesting point of view. I kind of don't agree that they were going for mere shock value. I do think that it played into the story. But that's what you guys thought about it, and I thank you guys for sharing your thoughts about it because I did see some comments over at Going In Raw, some people saying, yeah, no, I wasn't into this. They shouldn't have. It's a little bit of finger wagging over there. So I was curious about your guys' opinions, and I appreciate that. Hey, tomorrow's Thanksgiving. I want to say I am very thankful for the audience here at Wrestle Juice for allowing me to show up on your phone or your laptop or your TV or what have you and talk wrestling both here over at Friendo Club at Going In Raw with Larson or just me. I want to say thanks, and I hope you guys have a safe and good Thanksgiving. And yeah, eat a lot of turkey, have a lot of food. We'll see you around.